Welcome, everyone, to Plant Powered Metro New York's new series, Change Makers, where we interview people in our community who are changing their lives and that of those around them for the better through a plant-based lifestyle. I'm Jim Spellos, and every month we're going to chat with some amazing individuals, have them share their journeys, their obstacles, and their successes. Tonight, for our first show, we are honored to have with us Cathy Katin-Grazzini, and I'm sure glad I asked you how to pronounce your name, otherwise I would have butchered it right there. Cathy, so much. Cathy's a plant-based chef and cookbook author of Love the Foods That Love You Back. She's food editor for Veg World magazine and manages her blog, Cathy's Kitchen Prescription, where she shares the latest recipes and guidance on sustainable, healthy vegan cooking, nutrition, and lifestyle. She's certified in plant-based nutrition from the T. Colin Campbell Center for Nutritional Studies at Cornell, and she went on to complete professional culinary training at Ruby Cooking School. She's a member of the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine and trained as a PCRM Food for Life instructor. And she and her husband, Giordano Katin-Grazzini, who photographed the cookbook, which is absolutely stunning, live in Ridgefield, Connecticut. Cathy, how are you tonight?
I'm great, Jim. Thank you. Happy to be here.
Oh, it's so great to have you here. So, question for you. It's probably going to be the first question I ask everyone, but most people in this movement can identify a date or an occurrence that sort of transformed them, that changed their lives. Do you mind sharing what yours was?
Yeah, for sure. Well, that certainly holds true for us as well. It was back in 2013 that my husband Giordano started having some medical issues, and it turned out that he had a narrowing in his one of his arteries under his collarbone that eventually became bad enough that it required surgery. And what should have been a very routine and simple sort of surgery, vascular surgery, turned out to be an utter nightmare. They replaced a piece of his artery. It turned out it was not just narrowed; it was blocked with an enormous amount of plaque. We didn't know that he had a blockage and that he had atherosclerosis. Nobody, none of the screening had indicated that, but we knew it afterwards. But what really became traumatic was the day after his surgery. He was not doing well, and at some point his blood pressure, they couldn't get it under control. And in the afternoon, the sutures of the graft that they had done burst open, and he started bleeding out. And it was one of those code blue things in the hospital. They rushed him back into emergency surgery, and he heard the nurses as he was losing consciousness say, "Boy, I thought I'm going to lose this one." It was an utter horror and terribly traumatic. Afterwards, we had to. They counseled us for post-traumatic stress, and we realized that he had a medical condition, atherosclerosis, that surgery and medications could only slow the advance of. But we were devastated, but grateful he survived what should have been routine. But did you know that medical errors are the third leading cause of death in this country? And, something that's not, at least a study in 2013 indicated that. And that was a very close call for us. So that kind of sort of sent us home when he was able to leave the hospital, and a dramatic search for what in the world could we do to slow the advance of this disease, or better yet, reverse it. And
that's the follow-up, because what happens for a lot of people is they go on a mission and they start getting really angry that, why didn't somebody tell me that a plant-based lifestyle could actually do this? So who was the first person you stumbled upon that made you go, wow, they should have?
Well, yeah, it wasn't actually, it's interesting. My reaction was not anger. It was such gratitude that there was a branch to grab onto, and it was I ran across the research, the media studies about Bill Clinton, and when he had his quadruple bypass, who was he counseled by but Caldwell Esselstyn Jr. and Dean Ornish.
Right.
And that sent me down that road to buy their books and read their literature. And after that, T. Colin Campbell and the China study, and like so many people in our movement, all these the data was, so much of it is out there. It's just it's not commonly known by most physicians, and certainly it was unknown to us. So it was a whole flipping of our world and our lifestyle and our way of cooking and everything else.
Now, you were vegetarian at that point.
We had been, not super strict, but for 30 years, pretty much, we didn't eat meat and chicken and so forth. We lapsed here and there, but mostly we had seen, too many videos of how animals were treated, and so that was so upsetting and disturbing that many years ago we had changed our way of eating. But my husband is Italian. We lived in Italy for many years. We certainly had plenty of olive oil and cheese and eggs and dairy products. So it didn't help Giordano's vasculature, and my medical history, family history is full of heart disease and cancer as well. So we grabbed on with both hands, and it was a lifesaver for us.
And so I want to let people know, if you have questions of Cathy, put them in the chat, and hopefully we can get to some at the end. You mentioned you lived in Italy. That sounds amazing. So were you a professional chef then? Were you a cook then?
Oh, no. This was, well, I first went to Italy, and I met my husband in Italy as a graduate student through Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, where I was studying economics and political science. And we met through mutual friends, and ended up staying longer in Italy. And anyway, it was a real romance, and we ended up living here, and then we moved back there. He's from Florence, and we lived there for several years, but eventually we did come back to the States. But I was not cooking, and this was way before his medical issues. So although I learned a lot about cooking, just Italian cooking, while I was there, and from a culture point of view, and how central cooking and home cooking is in Italy and throughout Europe, it was that was wonderful introduction. And
yes, you brought that love back to the States. So what got you into the full-time career in the food business, which is not the easiest business in the world? You were going finance, food. Finance is probably easier, right?
That's true. Well, after our medical ordeal, and we understood that we had, remember reading Caldwell Esselstyn's his book, and there was a page that he talked about no oil, and it just couldn't compute. I must have read that paragraph, 6 times, and I felt like, how can you possibly cook, with both hands tied behind your back? It just, especially after living all those years in Italy and so forth, I decided I even though I love to cook, and I had, always been interested in cooking and had a lot of fun with it, I decided to get more classical professional training, and I did Ruby's professional plant-based program, which does use oils and so forth. But it was a wonderful grounding and filled in a lot of areas where I didn't have that training or that understanding beforehand. So it was a great foundation, and that's what launched my interest and my passion and a career change for me.
I want to jump into Ruby, because a lot of people might not know that, but we do have a question that sort of ties into what you were just talking about, which is, are you off oil and fats 100% at this point?
Totally. Yeah, and the whole cookbook is, without sugar, without salt, and without oils, and that's how we live.
Okay, so Ruby, which is roux, as in a roux you're making for a bechamel or something,
Right.
Entirely online? Is it a physical place? How does it work?
Well, it's I live in Connecticut, in a smallish town, and so I don't have culinary schools nearby, and it wasn't practical for me to go to Boston or or even Manhattan on a frequent basis for a couple of years to do culinary training. But they have a lot of, it's an online program. They train a lot of, they work with Marriott, they work with, a lot of chefs around the world, and also home cooks that just want to up their game. And they have a lot of different, they have a plant-based module, one of their courses that's professional. And then they also have others, and they have, other programs that are not plant-based. So, it runs the gamut. But the one I did was, it's about a 6-month program, I believe. And, it was pretty rigorous. It was like a full-time job, but it was great. It was good feedback and really fun.
Well, it had to be fun, right? So we'll fast forward, and all of a sudden you decide to write a book. I'm sure that didn't happen overnight. So what brought you to that realization? Because look, we're at a time right now where blogs and podcasts and videos really are the main reason and approach for people communicating. But you went old-fashioned on this.
Yeah, no, it's true. Well, for a number of years, I had been doing, personal chefing, working with private clients, doing cooking classes out of my home and also in other people's homes, advising people about transitioning to this lifestyle, and for those people that needed that guidance. But when COVID hit, I found, I was cut off from my students, and I didn't feel comfortable cooking in other people's homes at that, especially in the beginning. I decided, well, this is the perfect time. I certainly had accrued hundreds of recipes and enough for a cookbook, and it was just very fortuitous that a friend introduced me to book agents that were interested in what I do, and Giordano did all the photographs for the book, and which get a lot of, every recipe has photographs associated with it, and we were very, very lucky that when the agent sent out the proposals to all the publishers, that we were approached by a wonderful publisher, Rizzoli, that does beautiful books, and they wanted to go forward with it. So it was just a lot of good luck.
Love to show some pictures. We had a little scroll that we were working on. You might want to reload that again because it stopped. And while Cathy's doing that, the next question really I was going to have is why Rizzoli as a publisher? Because when I started looking into it, they really aren't that heavily focused in the vegan or vegan book lifestyle. They did one other, Vegan Butcher, but what really drew them to you?
Oh, wait, let me see if I can do this. Hang on.
This is the
I
technical.
don't know. I think it was just a lot of luck that they were looking for a plant-based or a vegan cookbook. It was just, I really don't know. They do a lot of beautiful, very visual books. So I knew that much about them. But I think, again, it was just timing, luck. They liked what they saw, and they made it happen. So for 2 years, we worked on this cookbook.
By the way, if you haven't seen the book, while we were going to put this up there, let's get you a quick little visual of the cover there, which, again, it's an exquisite book. And one of the things that I'm wondering is whether is your husband a professional photographer? Because those pictures are outstanding.
No, thank you. He is not he doesn't do it for work. He does passion. And he's been a nature photographer for many, many years. But I can share it. Somehow the program crashed. So I had to reload it. Let's see if it's working yet now. There we go. Okay. All right, you should see it now. So he was working outdoors for the most part, landscape and nature photography, macro photography, and that sort of thing. But he's always, he shares so many interests and so forth, and certainly the cooking and the nutritional front as well. that he got into the photography as well. And I think that was a big advantage for the cookbook as well, because it was part of the draw, and the attraction was his contribution.
I mean, I gotta tell you that I've never read a recipe book cover to cover before. It's not the way people typically read these types of books, but your introduction, it lays out the emotional, the planetary, the nutritional reasons for whole food plant-based. Did you ever consider writing this not as a recipe book, but just telling the story and telling why this is so important? Or is the recipe book?
I feel it's a good question. There are so many books out there on. I'm not a trained nutritionist. I certainly have our story that I could share, but my passion is really in the culinary area, and I felt that I was best equipped to really share. I really wanted to share not only because a lot of the recipes are global. I wanted people to have more access. I wrote the book for people um, in thinking if I had had this information when I had started this journey, it would have been a whole different ballgame and so much easier. So I wanted to sort of lighten the load for the people that are coming after me. That when they're cooking plant-based, it's a beautiful and exciting exercise, and it doesn't have to be the same old, I don't know. There's so many recipes that are redundant, and the world is a wide place, and and terribly untapped in terms of plant-based traditions all across the globe that most people don't have any exposure to. So I really wanted to bring that forward, and I thought that was a contribution. I hadn't seen so much out there.
Was it written for the plant comfortable, the kitchen comfortable, or the kitchen intimidated? And where did you want to go with this?
Yeah, I really was trying to point in many different directions. So there's chapters like my building block chapter, which is the first chapter in there, which is sauces and dressings and fundamental things that I draw from that are used in many of the following recipes throughout the book. And many of those recipes, I mean, it's for people that want to dive in, that are shy about cooking, that don't have culinary training. But there are some other recipes in there that are a little more exotic, a little more involved for individuals that are comfortable in the kitchen, or and want to up their game and do something a little more exciting or a little more ambitious. So it really runs the gamut. Hopefully.
Yeah,
people
your building block section is spectacular, and you mentioned I kept seeing miso in there, and I know there's some people in this movement who go miso, it's salty, stay away from it. But talk to me about your preference for miso and how it really adds flavors to the dishes that you've created.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about that, and also all the ways you can build flavor when you're not using salt or sugar or oil. So there was research that came out a number of years ago out of Japan, human testing, that indicated it was testing miso soups and their effect on human health. And to everybody's surprise, that in spite of the salinity of miso, unlike salts, it did not elevate blood pressure, and in fact, it tended to lower heart rate. So it's unless other studies come out to the contrary, it seems to be beneficial. It probably has to do with the fact that it's fermented, but not all fermented foods that use salt are benign. So stomach cancer is greatest in Korea, and is tends to be thought to be linked to kimchi and some of the other dishes. So sauerkrauts and salted vegetables, preserved vegetables may not carry those advantages. It might have to do with the koji culture. That's the fermented rice that's used with the soybeans, typically in miso, although there are many different kinds of miso using other grains and other legumes. But that is, no one quite understands yet, why the advantages with miso, but it does seem to hold them. So I offer that for people that are used to a traditional diet and and want more flavor, from it's not just salinity. There's a lot of umami flavor in the different misos that you can use, so it can be a real advantage. But there are lots of ways to build flavor.
Well, and some others might be. So if someone didn't want to use miso, or they don't have access to miso where they are, what other ideas can you give them?
Yeah, well, there's, I use vegetables, in very unusual ways to kind of really tease out their flavor and concentrate their flavor, and use that for seasoning as well. So I might grind dried mushrooms. Porcini is my favorite, but shiitake, all the different kinds of dried mushrooms that you can get have their unique qualities, and use that as a flavoring powder in dishes where it's appropriate. I dehydrate citrus and grind that into a powder, whether it's limes, oranges, lemons, and so forth. And that makes, add it at the very end of cooking. Otherwise, it could make dishes bitter. It's a real punch in terms of flavor as well. Chilies, the same thing. Dried chilies you can grind into your own chili powders, and they all, there's such a, there is a ton of different types of chilies from all over the world with their different heat levels and different smokiness and chocolate notes, and they just are wonderful sources for cooking as well. And I roast vegetables. I mean, I can go on and on, but roasting cherry tomatoes or the mini peppers, you really concentrate their flavors, and I use them in sauces. And as glazes over savory pastries and so forth, to really imbue dishes with different types of flavors. So, and this is in addition to the regular herbs and spices that that I use very widely, because they're so full of polyphenols and so wonderful for us, but they also are so exciting to the palate. So you can excite your mouth in all different kinds of ways. Without any salinity whatsoever, but the miso, I feel, is pretty safe to do.
It is, and actually, someone while you were mentioning that asked if there was a good substitute for miso, but I think you really covered that, with all the different options that are out there. What I'm interested in right now is, how long does it take you to develop a recipe from the time you start thinking about it to the time you're ready to put it on your blog or put it in the book?
Okay. Well, this is a question I was prepared to talk about when you were going to ask possibly about what question I've never asked, and you asked it. So I'll go ahead and
that question, but I'm just going to give it a few more minutes.
Okay, good. So my approach, I think the reason I'm so passionate about doing what I do is because it satisfies so many interests that I have. So I'm a very food curious person, and I always have been. So I love to study the foodways of different cultures across the world. I just find it's quite interesting, and even from an anthropological point of view, to understand the history and the culture. So if there's sometimes I'll just go flipping through the atlas and decide, I'd like to explore this part of the world or this country, or what are their, food traditions, what kind of. Almost every agrarian society is plant-based or was plant-based before the 20th century, and processed foods or increase in affluence has permitted, and cheap meat production and so forth. But in 100 years ago and prior to that, these were all mostly agrarian with very, very infrequent use of fish or meat or chicken and so forth. And so I'll take a country or a culture, and I'll explore it, and I'll discover searching recipes that are plant-based, maybe not entirely the way I would feel comfortable eating them, because they might involve cooking oils, they might have dairy, or they might have other things. But I'll preserve the flavor profile of that dish, to the spices, the herbs, the native fruits and vegetables, which now you can find, if in ethnic markets, or in your area, and I'll just clean it up, and play with it a little bit, And that's how I develop, a recipe. And then the artistry, the presentation of it, which I think is really important and people tend to discount. But that's what makes, we eat with our eyes before it ever gets closer. So you want a dish presented so that it really appeals to all our senses and before it even gets to the taste buds.
As these pictures can show. So you mentioned in the book that you like to adapt old vegetarian recipes. Give me an example of one that you put in the book that really is one that you think adapted so well.
Ooh, I'd say almost everything. I mean, there are also recipes in the cookbook that are just out of my own noodle that are, like this one, which is pureed peppers that I use as a glaze and as a flavorant. Or these, I mean, so it's a mixture of invented things as well as traditional dishes. But gosh, there's an Armenian dish that just comes to mind, called Jingilov Khat. And it is a wonderful, it's a leavened bread or dough that's rolled very thinly and then stuffed with every green and herb that you can possibly imagine. And the wonderful tradition that this comes from is just from villages traditionally in Armenia, where folks would go out in springtime and go out into the meadows and the woodlands and collect wild greens and bring them all together collectively as a village and cook together and create an amazing quantity of these breads, which are stuffed very simply and cooked on a griddle. Mm-hmm. And it's just the most delicious thing you can imagine. And so that's just one that comes to mind, but there's
a book full, right? A whole book full of those delicious recipes.
There are just many, many, many.
So we only have a few more minutes left. A few rapid fire questions before we end up for the night. One is, what do you think is going to be the book's greatest benefit for the community? What do you think the community really can take out of this book, and how can it move what we are doing to create a healthier environment forward?
I think it's so challenging for people. It's such an assault of processed foods and fast food in our culture, unfortunately. We don't have what exists in Europe, which is a long tradition, a culinary tradition. They're really valued. And this is one thing I learned in Italy as well. So I'm hoping that, this will give people hope and encouragement. It takes you through, so that people are taught not just to depend on recipes, but to also understand, what makes a recipe work and how you can go to a market and see what looks beautiful and just buy it and know what to do with it when you get home. So I'm hoping that what I'm offering here and walking people through every step of the way, that the takeaway might be to make better cooks out of us all and to kind of instill a culinary culture that we have lost. We have lost the processed foods and fast foods to our peril. And, from the environmental point of view as well. And also socially, we've lost the cohesion around the common table that I think is such a part of healing and health, emotionally as well as physically. So it may be a pipe dream, but it's my mission to, to bring people to the table, make it a party, make it social, make it beautiful and health promoting. So that's what I'm all about.
Beautiful stuff. So you've already answered the question of what question will you never ask. So I'm going to leave you out and put you out with this one, because I'm not going to ask you which recipe is your favorite. I can't do that. What are you having for dinner tonight? Why don't you tell everybody that?
Okay. So for dinner tonight, it's actually one of the recipes in the cookbook. It's my Cuban black bean soup, which is really more like a stew. It's a very thick and delicious and simple. I mean, it's slow cooking, but you don't have to be there. You can walk away for this one and just give it time for the sofrito to, all the vegetables to really soften and so forth. So we're gonna have that, and I also have grilled vegetables and quinoa with the rustic tomato sauce that's all made already from last night. And so if we're still hungry after our hearty soup, we'll dive into our veggies and fresh cherry for dessert.
Perfect. And how can people follow you? Online, website? What do you have?
Yeah, so lots of different ways. I'm on Facebook under Cathy's Kitchen Prescription. That's my website. If you want to contact me, if you have any culinary questions, any lifestyle questions, anything I can help with, you can contact me through the website. If you want to look at my pictures, there's a lot of things in the cookbook and a lot of things after the cookbook that you'll find on my Instagram page. And that's, and I love to connect with the community. So don't be shy. I'm really hoping to help people up their culinary game, not be intimidated by cooking, because so many people are, and it doesn't have to be. It's not difficult. It's not rocket. There's nothing really at risk. It should be all fun and how we can help each other.
It should be fun. Food is fun. Being with people and sharing food is fun. Cathy, you have been so special, and thank you so much for being our guest tonight on Change Makers. It's going to be a healthy wrap for our first episode. So a couple of things just to shout out. Number one, as I get the wrong person on the camera, there we go. If you have any ideas for people you want to suggest to us you'd like to have as a change maker, send me an email at jspellos@ppmny.org. Right now, for Cathy, for the amazing team here at Plant Powered Metro New York, I'm Jim Spellos, wishing you optimal health, a plate full of plants, and look forward to seeing you back here next month. Take care, everyone.